Everyone, welcome back to the podcast. It's so exciting to have guests from around the world come on the show. For me being in Canada, I get to travel the world with a microphone and a set of headphones, and it's exciting to talk to great people. And Harris is on today. We're going to be talking about Harris's website. I went there and I felt so welcomed and in the right place. There's just something about Harris's site that just, I don't know. It's just the place to be. So you have to go. We'll have links in the show notes to find Harris's site. But Harris is here to talk about podcasting. And I can't think of a better person to talk podcasting with and to start my day with. Harris, welcome to the How to Podcast series.
Hey, Dave. Thanks so much. I'm really, really pleased to be here.
It's exciting to have you here. And I know for one fact, Harris, I know I don't have an accent, but I love your accent. So Canadians don't have accents, which is, I don't know. Do we have an accent?
I think everyone has an accent if they're from not where you're from, right?
Okay. All right. So if you need me to clarify anything I say, like sorry, or any of those things, let me know and I'll give you the Canadian definition of anything that I say. But welcome, Harris.
That's cool.
Nice to have you here.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm really excited for today.
So I mentioned your website at the beginning. Can you take us through your website? I told you before we hit record, when I came to your website, I felt so welcomed. I felt so like this was the right place for me as a new viewer to your website. It's beautiful, by the way, and well done on your website. Take us through the website. Take us through who it's for, who you help, because I think we need more Harrises in the world is really what I would say. So take us through your website.
Oh, thank you. So as background, I set up the Centre for Childhood Trauma Healing this year, and I wanted my website. I've got ADHD and autism, and because of the ADHD, I find a lot of information like too much. And a lot of the folks that I help are also neurodivergent, not all of them, but a lot of them. And so I wanted it to be like, this is where you find things. If you want to read more, there's the option, but you don't have to wade through information in order to get to the bit that you want. So on the one hand, I try to make it sort of punchy but brief. And then the actual content of what I'm writing is coming really from an emotional point of view of inclusion, of non-judgment. And, individuals might have their own feelings about their own sort of marginalized identity that they belong to, whether that's the queer community, neurodivergent community, if you're a very sensitive human being. But I try to kind of not put my own spin on it. It's very much that it's a space for you to feel how you're feeling. And I'm not going to pass any kind of judgment or comment on that unless you ask for my input. And I feel like my background was in intersectional rights. That's what I did for years, mostly for free. I did some workshops in schools, but for the main part, it was just a passion. It's something that I did. And I also, off the back of that, ran the Transection podcast, which was my very first one, which ran for 4 seasons. I was really, really pleased with the content of it. But again, that was all about giving a platform to help people doing important work in different areas, like underrepresented areas, and giving them a voice, having a conversation with them, talking about deep stuff. And I think for some people, talking about deep things or important things, and for them that seems like a heavy thing, but I think it's one of my kind of special subjects, and it's where my brain lives all the time. So I think it feels easy for me to have those conversations and create that community and create that feeling that, you're not on your own, and the hard stuff you've been through. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it's important, but it's not you. It's not the only, you are not your injury. You are not your pain. And I think part of my job as a coach is to see people as whole and complete, even if they're struggling. Because the better you view somebody, actually, the more able they are to realise their own potential. So obviously in my work of talking about childhood trauma and other difficult things that people have been through, they present some stuff that is really hard. And, there have been moments here or there where I've had to take a breath and just be like, okay. But ultimately, everyone who comes to me is a whole and complete human being and has enormous capability. And I often say to people, if you've got capability to be injured, you've also got the capability to be healed. It's the same mechanism. It's just that one is less than ideal and the other is hard work, but it's a change in the positive. So I try and bring that kind of message and that vibe to everything I do, and feel that before I create something.
It's amazing. And you're also an author on top of this.
Yes.
So tell us about that as well.
So I've co-authored 2 books.
Good.
The first one was in 2021. It was for a foundation called the Pride and Joy Foundation, who are in the US. And they wanted to start an inclusive kind of publishing house.
Nice.
And to get it going, they wanted to raise money through getting a bunch of us authors together. We all kind of donated a piece of work, a piece of writing, and also some money. And I really wanted to do it. Excuse me. So I wrote my piece. I had a friend sponsor me and sort of like foot me the money at the time. And the book, within its first, I think, week of pre-sales, it hit like 5 bestseller boards, and it was the first ever published queer business book. Obviously, there's stuff in there that is good for everybody, but no one had ever published it before, because I think there's this idea in the publishing world and also in any kind of media that minority stuff is too niche. It's not going to make any money. It's not going to have an impact. And not only did we hit 5 bestseller boards, but also our distributing publishers, the one who actually, kind of helped us to kind of get this all going, was so impressed by the numbers that they actually petitioned the Library of Congress in the US. I've never been to the US. I've got lots of friends over there. But obviously I felt this was a big deal. And we petitioned them to add 2 new national literary categories that have never existed. I think one's queer business and the other one was non-binary, which
Nice.
I am.
Nice.
And so that happened. I had to actually take a week off because I was so in shock. And as I talk a lot about in my work, even, obviously anybody might feel that way, but traumatized brains particularly have a really hard time adjusting to good things, and very big good things as well. So I had to take a week off because I felt so overwhelmed. I wasn't functioning very well. And then my second book, which got published on the 1st of February 2023, was an anthology. I was one of 28 authors who wrote pieces about what it was like to grow up going to school in the era of Section 28, which was a law in the UK that prohibited schools and staff from talking about homosexuality.
Really?
And what it was like for us as queer kids to grow up in that environment where we could be bullied for being queer, but no one was allowed to mention it or acknowledge it. So it was a bit wild.
Wow.
And a bit of a free for all. So yeah.
Oh, amazing. You talk about how that maybe those books are not sellable. They're not a big enough market. So we're not going to maybe have a category for these books. We're not going to promote these books. And it's almost like I see that in podcasting, where it's like, well, it's just such a small audience, and who's going to listen, and do we really need it? And I think the opposite way. I think we need as many voices as possible.
Yes.
And going back to your website, like I said, when I came to your website, I felt so welcomed and included that that's how it should be, not just for a website, but for a podcast, for a book, for a message, for us as content creators. We need to have that same feeling I have coming to your website. We need to have that in all that we do. And that's what I'm hoping in podcasting, is that by having great guests on to talk about their story, it opens the door for all of us to come across a podcast, an author, a website, where we're going to find healing, we're going to find help, support, and hear somebody who sounds like and is living the life that we're living, and we feel represented as a listener. So that's what I'm excited about. again, going back to your website, I'm stuck on it. I have it on the screen while we're talking, and I keep looking over to the side because I'm looking at your site. I love it. But for you in podcasting, are you feeling like you're connecting with an audience through your podcast?
Yeah, so I'm having a little bit of a break at the moment. I'm just in the stages of planning my third podcast, which is called It's Only Trauma. It's me and a friend who is also a survivor and also works in a sort of alternative field of somatics. Although, well, she's studying it. She hasn't set up her business yet, but she knows so much about it. One of her special interests, that's my word, not hers, but is a lot around codependency and narcissism and how that all goes together. That's also part of my work. And this is stuff we talk about all the time. It's really profound. It's really useful. We help each other to see these things all the time. We have a lot of conversations. We both study this type of stuff a lot and have done for years. So, eventually I was like, I want to do a podcast that is kind of more to do with my job now working in trauma, and she was the perfect person. So I said to her, I'm looking for a co-host and who's kind of in the, maybe does something complementary, maybe, she's like, what would they have to be LGBTQ? And I was like, no, not necessarily. So we kind of like delicately came to the idea that actually I was asking her if she wanted to do it and she was asking me if she could do it. So
yeah, nice.
It was really meant to be. But I think in the past, like connecting to people with podcasts, I definitely did. But I think because it was an experiment, I was trying stuff out. It was totally out of the blue. I mean, my very first season, I was trying to film each week and get something ready sort of within days. And I had no experience. I was doing this all on my own. And it wasn't massively planned or thought out. It was such an intuitive experience. So yes, I connected to people, but generally each episode had hundreds, maybe a couple of thousand views or listens, which is still fine. But I think with this new one, I want to connect with people in a really big way, make a really big impact with this work because I believe in it so much. And also I've now got the experience to plan how it's going to be. My co-host is in her day job is a project manager for a massive international company. So not only am I holding myself to a slightly higher standard of planning and thinking it out, but she's also like really nailing down the details because that's what she's good at and that's what she does as her job. So I'm already connecting with people a lot with the work that I'm doing, but I'm hoping that the podcast will be kind of, like society influencing really, because I think there's a huge amount around trauma healing that is not popular enough yet. So, and I think other survivors need this information. A lot of them don't have it.
Yeah. And what I love about podcasting is how you don't have to have permission to do your show.
Yeah.
There's no one you have to answer to. There's no one that's looking over your shoulder telling you if you're doing it right or wrong. You can build whatever podcast you want and speak to anyone you want to speak to. There's no rules. There's no gatekeeper in podcasting. And that is what I love. And I'm looking for podcasters to help all of us be better humans at the end of the day. I think there's so much of this stuff going on in the world that I just look at it and I'm like, why are we so angry all the time? Why is there this underlying anger? Is it fear? What is it? And how can we get more voices out there in the world that can help us to be better as a human population? Like, how can we be better?
Yeah. And I think one of the things around minorities not taking up things like this is that the representation isn't there. So we haven't seen people like us doing it. It takes somebody to say, have you thought of doing that directly to somebody before they go, oh, I'd never even considered it as a possibility. I know people who, even in an era in the UK where going to university was free, a lot of people didn't go because they didn't know that it was even a possibility for them or that they were a good candidate. And I think the same happens with minorities all over, that folks are so practiced at kind of managing and talking about their marginalization or even thinking about it. But no one said to them, listen, like, what you have to contribute here is important. And I think the other thing is that the style of the really big podcasts mostly seem very masculine. And it's a lot of white or light-skinned guys
Right.
who are very opinionated, extremely assertive, who ask the really hard-hitting questions. And it makes for great media, but actually I don't feel necessarily that we need more of that. And I did an interview with somebody yesterday, and he's a very sensitive, lovely, queer black guy. And he's kind of just cutting his teeth with his very first podcast. And he said, at the end, he's like, do you have any feedback? And I said, listen, when you emotionally connected with what we were saying, you were like a different human being. I was so engaged with what you were saying as the host. And I think those kind of traditionally masculine, almost transactional or logical type things, or where they're talking about ideologies that are pretty weird, and it's very harsh, it's very binary, it's very harsh, it's very black and white. I think a lot of us look at that and think, well, if I have to be that way to have a podcast that has got a chance in hell of doing okay, I can't be like that. I don't think like that. And actually, the podcasts I find that do better, that are not that way, are the ones where we're emotionally engaged. And yes, I think we need to bring value to it. But at the same time, I think our presence, and this is the thing I try to teach people all the time, you don't have to be an activist. I think for those of us who are marginalized in one way or another, a lot of us do fall into jobs of like diversity, equity and inclusion because we're so practiced at talking about oppression and the kind of crap that we have to deal with.
Yeah.
But and so some of us get kind of put into those situations, particularly if we're articulate or we're able to kind of hold space for people in having these conversations. But actually, it's a quick way to burn out for most of us. And actually, I think our presence is more sustainable, it's more self-fulfilling, and also you're not dealing with so many arseholes, people who are, of playing devil's advocate or kind of just being annoying. And I think when you're in a space where you're kind of doing sort of activism and advocacy, and I'm not saying this isn't a worthwhile job, there's always people who need to do that stuff. But I think if you're like, that's going to burn me out, or I've already done my time or whatever, if you're in that kind of space, then you attract people who know less, who don't know, and you kind of make that a shared space where they can learn and ask questions. And that's important. But I think long-term, something sustainable where you get to be you kind of create your own space, you take up your space, you create a bubble where you get to be you and talk about the things you want to talk about. And actually other people have the privilege and advantage of listening to that, but you're not co-creating that space with them necessarily. And I feel like podcasting is such a good way to do that in a sustainable way that's not going to emotionally fatigue you.
Yeah. And I think if you're listening to this episode and you're saying, I love what Harris is saying, and there's something about Harris as a person that I'm connecting with, I want you to know that I, Dave, here in Canada, a white male, I can't do Harris's podcast because Harris has Harris's own view of the world. And that's what I love, is that you can connect with Harris directly. We'll have all the links and everything to talk to Harris, but you can actually speak to Harris and connect with Harris. I love the idea that you have a podcast that is so welcoming and people can find their space. I see it as kind of like, when you have your hands full and you're coming up to a building and you can't open the door and someone ahead of you holds the door for you. I think we need more of that kind of humanity. It doesn't matter in that moment who I am or how I identify. I have my hands full and I can't open the door. And you being kind, or vice versa, me being kind to a person I have no idea who they are, I have no idea their story. But in that moment, that's humanity. That's just being a kind, gentle person to each other. And how can we serve each other? So we need more people to hold the door open, whatever that means physically or whatever. We just need more of that in our world. And I think as podcasters, we can hold the door for people and bring people into our world that we may never cross paths otherwise. The opportunity for us to communicate with each other in two different places in the world. This is amazing that I have time with you. So that's what I think we need more of in podcasting.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And I interviewed a guy called Josh Richards when I did the Transaction podcast, and I met him originally in Perth in Australia when I lived there for a bit. And I saw him speak at a talk he did at the Women in Oil and Gas meeting or something. There's a lot of women in oil and gas over there, and they've got their own sort of group. And he was talking about how diversity is crucial for not only teams, but kind of humans in general. And he was talking about, at the time, he was a Mars One candidate, which unfortunately kind of never made it past a certain point. They ran out of funding, but the idea was that they were going to establish the first kind of mini colony on Mars, and they had the plans. And it's a one-way ticket at this moment in time with our technology. So he was talking about that, and he was talking about how part of their selection process, one of the reasons they weren't very popular is because they weren't tied to a particular country. So, and it kind of rubbed a lot of the other space agencies up the wrong way. But one of the things he was talking about was that when they were intentionally building teams, they were making sure that each team member had very different life experience, came from different demographics, different countries and stuff, because it makes their problem solving absolutely incredible. Whereas if you get four guys from the US, like Ivy League educated, you know, very similar identities, their pool of problem solving skills have really, really diminished.
Yeah.
Because they're all coming from a similar space. So I just feel like society needs us, even though perhaps the systems as they are right now make us feel opposite, or create conditions where we definitely feel opposite. But I feel very strongly that marginalized people it's not that we should have to kind of add to society in order to be viewed as human beings or just be treated with basic respect. But I do think that beyond that, there's a huge amount of kind of humanity. And also, I very much have the attitude that we are all kind of one, or we're all aspects of the same thing, or we're all aspects of the universe or life or whatever. And that actually whatever is missing in society is missing for everyone, whether they know it or not, or whether they emotionally value that or not. At the book launch this year for the second book, 28, one of my friends that came, she identifies as cisgender, like she, was assigned female at birth. She feels that was correct, and she's straight. And she came out of there and she said, I feel so angry that I was deprived of queerness in growing up and at school, because there's so much life experience that I didn't get to have. And I feel that she's absolutely right. And I feel like everyone who gets involved in sort of podcasting or putting their voice out there is kind of part of this really big solution that I feel is maybe a bit too difficult to put into words, but
yeah. Harris, I could talk to you all day. And I know you can't do that because you have other things to do in life. But I was really looking forward to our conversation today. As the calendar was getting closer to today, I'm like, I get to spend time with Harris. I can't wait for this. There's just something about you. And again, there's something about you as a person that I just feel we need more Harrises in the world. I love it. Podcasting wise, my goal for this podcast is I really want to help people to create their own space through their podcast. And however that looks to them, whatever success metric means something to them, that's not for me to judge. I'm here to say, if you feel that you have a message for the world, podcasting could be a great way to do that. And I'm anticipating there's people listening to our conversation who really identify with what we're saying, but have no idea where to start. I want this to be welcoming and inclusive for the listener as well. Your thoughts around just starting the show. What was the hardest thing for you? And what would you suggest to a listener who is struggling with all of the stuff that has to happen behind the scenes to start a podcast? What's a simplified version to encourage somebody to start their show?
So I think it is a hard thing to do. And until you've got a team producing everything for you, it's not a small commitment. Firstly, I would say work out exactly what you want to achieve with it and do a bit of research, look at other podcasts that are doing well and work out, maybe look at some podcasts that you feel like, oh, I would work in that way, or they think similarly to me, or the way that they talk is very much up my street, and work out what elements of that would work for you, that would fulfill you and keep you going. Because there are a million different ways to do a podcast. But I think, working out, because the thing is, the more tailored the process is to you, the more sustainable it will be.
Good.
If it suits you the way that it's done, then you're more likely to be able to run it longer term. The other thing is that it doesn't have to be perfect. Work out the simplest way that you can do it. So as an example, my friend and I, who are about to start our filming next week, both of us have ADHD. So sometimes to get organized in a day, it will be like 4 p.m. and we'll be like, oh, I think we're nearly ready to start. It can take us all day to kind of get to that point. So one of the methods that we're using is that we're going to get ready once and then film throughout the evening or whatever. So we only have to get ready once. We only have to set up once. And, originally the idea was that we were only going to record audio so that there was no pressure to kind of get ready and have cameras and all of that stuff. But I realized that actually the way I wanted to promote this work needed to have video involved. So this was kind of a compromise to kind of film in one day and do sort of enough. And also the other thing is that I want to be able to post twice a week. So it's also working out the easiest ways that I can make use of the recording time, of my time with my co-host, because she's much busier than me at the moment. Strategies to fill in gaps, the times that we might run out of material or she's not around. All of that kind of thing. So it's really thinking about all of that stuff. But also, I think a lot of people are camera shy. I'm very, oh no, what's the word? Oh, this happens to me all the time. I'm an introvert. That's what I wanted to say. Yeah. And the very first time in a business setting, I stood up and gave a talk about my business for 60 seconds. I was having a panic attack whilst delivering that.
Wow.
So it was never a thought that I would be in front of a microphone all the time and speaking all the time. So the fact that I do this now, like almost every day that I'm sort of on camera or doing something with somebody, recording for a summit or podcasts and stuff, that's a big surprise to me.
Yeah.
But I started out my very first podcast with a friend. We were just exchanging voice notes and telling very rude stories to each other. And they said, we should make this a podcast. I was like, yeah, go on then. And it was at the beginning of the pandemic. So I had nothing else to do. I think 2 days later, I knew it was coming. I got furloughed from work. So I was getting paid 80% of my wages, but I had no job. So yeah. I had time and money, and I didn't need to work like for the whole of that year. So wow. I was like, I'll do podcasting instead. And I'm really glad that I did it. And it wasn't perfect at the beginning. There was a lot of mess ups and I had no idea what I was doing, but it was so much fun. And I was talking about things that I cared about. So just don't get in your own head too much, plan it as much as you want to, think about it, do some research, but ultimately, like, it's so much fun. And I never thought it would become part of my life. And I'm so glad that I did it. So I've yet to hear someone say, oh, I really wished I hadn't done that when it comes to podcasting.
I like it. I guess I said, Harris, I could talk to you all day. There's just something about you that I'm drawn to. And I'm so happy to have you here. Before we jump off, and I know you have stuff to do, and I want to release you and let you do your stuff, and I really thank you for your time. Where do we find you? Talk again about the website, which I love, and the podcast that's coming. Can we do all that? And then I have one more question for you after that.
Yeah, sure. So my website is mxharrishill.com. That's mxharrishill.com. All of the stuff's on there, all the stuff about my podcast, my freebies. I've got like a reading list for childhood trauma survivors who want to have healthier relationships and start their recovery. I've got a webinar there about how trauma healing works and how trauma processing is different to trauma therapy, all different things. So, and all my links to my social media platforms and stuff. So, and my healing community. So go and have a look on there. And
it's a beautiful website.
Thank you.
Well, I got to say it again. And again, the podcast, the timing for the new podcast and when it's coming.
I don't know.
You don't know. It's coming soon,
We're going to start.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping maybe by sort of December, January that it will be here.
So and all that will be on the website as well.
Yes, so that I've already got a page set up. You can sign up to a mailing list and stuff. So once it's out, I'll tell you.
It's great. So I've been trying to come up with a question near the end of the podcast that makes you think and gives us a little insight into you a little bit more than all of the great things you've shared so far. When you leave the room, Harris, what do you hope people say about you as a person? People who know you, people who come in contact with you in day-to-day life, people listening to you right now. What do you hope that they say about you when you leave the room?
I think one is that they feel accepted and not judged. And that's a big value of mine. And the other is that I've made them laugh. Yeah. I think those are the two things that are most important to me, or at least that I've made them have a smile, because when I'm not working, I'm quite cheeky. And I think, you know, to feel accepted and get to feel that it's okay to be you and it's okay to be different, and that I'm not going to have a big reaction to that. And I support you in whoever you are, however you identify, even if, that's very standard. And also just that, you know, you've smiled or you've laughed, because I feel like life without a laugh is a bit dull, really.
And Harris, I want to tell you that that's what I'm going to be saying about you after we end off here, is you've done that for me. So you've already met your goal. So thank you for doing that for me and for the listeners of the How to Podcast series. I'm excited for you for the podcast coming up. I would love to have you back when the podcast is ready, and maybe have the two of you on and have a conversation about your show and promote the podcast. So keep me in mind. Okay. And again, thank you for making time to be on the How to Podcast series.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dave. It's been amazing. Thank you.
Excellent. And everyone, go check out all the show notes. Everything's there. Make sure you click the links and support another great content creator that we need in this world. Thanks, Harris.
Thank you.
Hey, it's Dave jumping on here at the end. I hope you're doing well. Thank you for listening to the How to Podcast series. Putting this out there for you. You're starting a podcast and you're like, Dave, the technology is giving me a headache. This editing thing is, I don't know, it's banana pants. I can't figure it all out. And you're thinking, if there was somebody who could help me with my podcast, I would pay them to do the editing for me. Guess what? I'm actually doing that. I have clients now, past guests who've been on the show, on one of my other podcasts, on this podcast. I'm doing some podcast consulting. I'm doing podcast editing. I'm helping with people launching their podcast, getting it, all the technology stuff, getting your podcast in all the players, helping you with your YouTube channel, your website. Oh, it just goes on and on. It goes on and on. And I would love to help you. So instead of going to Fiverr or Upwork, I've been on there. I keep trying to get on for jobs and nobody's paying attention to me, and I need attention. I would rather work with you as a listener of the show. So here's what I'm saying. Go to howtopodcast.ca, leave me a voice message, tell me what you need, and let's work out something that works for you and your budget. And if you need full service or you just need something quick like a drive-through, type service. I'm there for you. I got you. And if you like what you hear on any of my 7 podcasts, I can do that for you. I can. And I'd love to work with you because you are amazing. And I'm there to help you, whatever you need. howtopodcast.ca. Reach out, let me know what I can do to help you with your podcast. Thank you for listening. Catch you on the next episode. Take care.